Welcome everybody to a brand new episode of IDTALK4ED Live, the show for the unsung heroes of education. I'm your host, Sarfo-Mensah, and if this is your first time tuning in to the podcast, I welcome you and I hope that today's episode is one that we have you coming back for more. And if you're a returning listener or viewer of the podcast, as always, I welcome you back and hope that today's episode is one that you find informative, enlightening, and as always, insightful. So before we get into the main event, if you are listening or watching from YouTube, please hit the red subscribe button so you can get future notifications on new episodes. And if you're listening from Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcast, make sure you subscribe there as well. And then also, we do accept donations for folks who want to help us continue to build this platform and bring on awesome guests like the one we have today. You can do that in 4 different ways. If you go on Cash App, you can use our handle $IDTALK4ED. If you go on Venmo, you can use the handle @KwameSM. That's KWAMESM for those who are listening. And for those who are on PayPal, you can use our URL paypal.me/KwameSM. And then for those who want to get some perks and some behind the scenes footage of all things Identity Talk, you can become a patron today. Just go to the Patreon website, locate my name, Sarfo-Mensah, and you'll be able to find our community there. And for those that want to continue to catch up on past episodes and also look out for future ones, you can always go to our main website at IDTALK4EDucators.com. And then for my avid readers that are looking to add to their library or book list for this year, make sure you add Learn to Relearn, Support Identity in the Culture Forming Classroom to that list. It is my latest book, and I just want to thank all the people in the community who have been supporting the book since its release 5 months ago. It's still been a surreal experience just seeing people engage with the text, coming together with people who are committed to justice, who are committed to creating identity affirming spaces, not just for our young people, but also for our adults as well. And I don't know, there's just so much I could say about it that we could do a whole episode on it, but we're going to table all that. And I'm just going to say this. If you are someone that has read the book and you love what you've read, please, please, please leave a 5-star review on Amazon, Goodreads, or wherever you want to listen, wherever you leave your reviews. That's going to help with the visibility of the book. That's going to allow for more people to come into the community to engage with this text the way that you have. And then for those who have not ordered a copy, you can order it anywhere where you buy your books, any online book retailer. So make sure you all do that. And of course, you can go to learntorelearn.com to learn more about the book, the chapters, and all things in between. So thank you all for your continuous support. And let's keep on building this community. All right, people. So I always say that we have special guests who come on this podcast, but we really have one coming on today. And I couldn't be more excited about today's conversation. We're going to be talking about healing. We're going to be talking about international education. We're going to be talking about just the importance of prioritizing self, especially during these very difficult times that we find ourselves in, given the socio-political climate that we're in. So we have today a healer, we have an entrepreneur, we have an educator, former administrator, author, just a multi-hyphenate by every sense of the word. And I am excited to bring on Jamilah Pitts to the podcast to talk with us about her story, her journey in education, and what led her to come to this virtual stage today. So I'm going to bring Jamilah on and we're going to get this conversation started. Hello.
Thank you for that. It's so kind. So kind. Thank you.
Yes. How are we feeling?
I feel good. I'm feeling really grateful. The sun is out where I am right now in Ohio. So just always grateful to see another day for sure. I also just celebrated a birthday. So just another journey around the sun feels really grounding, feels really exciting. It feels really refreshing. So I feel good. I feel good.
Yeah, absolutely. We can't take the birthdays for granted.
Mhm.
Definitely can't take them for granted, especially as we get older. But I have a confession. So when I was growing up, I always thought the biggest thing coming out of Columbus, Ohio was Bow Wow. But then I came across you and I was sadly mistaken.
Oh my gosh, that's so
So
funny.
you done trumped them because you're just so amazing with everything that you're doing. And we're gonna get into all that as we get into this conversation. So
That's hilarious.
um
That's funny. I was not ready.
so and the only reason why it popped up is because Millennium Tour, he's been
Right.
popping up lately
Yes,
on
he
the
has.
social media platform. So just so happens to have another native of Columbus, Ohio here. So want to definitely talk about that and just start from the beginning. So growing up in Columbus, just tell us about what that early upbringing was like and what ultimately got you going down the path of wanting to become an educator.
Yeah, it's always a really beautiful question to answer because my drive, my passion to enter education was definitely intertwined with my lived experience, how I grew up. So I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, first generation college student, raised by a single parent. So one of three siblings. I'm the middle child out of my mom's children. And so I often like to distinguish that I grew up in an environment that still is and was economically and financially impoverished, but it was really rich in other ways. And I think it's important to just really speak to that difference, even though I grew up in a space and an environment where we definitely struggle financially. My mom made sure to create this really enriching, this really loving environment that poured into her children. I was thinking about earlier, just a random thought to myself about how do we cultivate just a love of education and this desire to be excellent in young children. And I often think back to what my mom did, and it was from a really early age cultivating a love of reading before it felt like something that wasn't exciting or something that we should shy away from. Like even prior to entering into any type of formal education, my mom cultivated this love of reading. She cultivated this passion for education, even as someone who never attended college. This importance of education was something that she was able to instill in all of us very early on. I also loved school. So my mom could only afford public schools, but she was really diligent in making sure that if her children had to attend public school, like we were going to attend the best public schools. And so around the time that I entered kindergarten, there was, I think some states still use this, but my mom had to go through a lottery system. And I remember her taking time off of work to go downtown to enter our names into the lottery so that I could go to a performing arts public school, like one of the few in the district. And so when I got to school, I loved it. I share in my book, I did not have a white teacher until I was in fifth grade. And it's really important for me to name that because so much of who I am, so much of my love of my community, of my history, of where I come from, certainly came from my mother being a first teacher, but also from these very early Black women teachers that were able to just really pour into the love and the beauty and the richness and the excellence of Black children. And so that was incredibly important. So I remember in third grade, my teacher, Miss Jackson, asking us to write essays about what we wanted to be. And at the time, I said that I wanted to be a teacher because I loved school. And even as a child, I loved babies, I loved children, which was interesting because I was just in third grade. I wanted to be a doctor, and I wanted to be an author. I also remember at the time really loving to learn about Black history. And I had learned at some point that Dr. King went to Morehouse College. And so I was like,
Mm.
well, I'm going to go to Morehouse College. That's where Dr. King went. And my teacher, Miss Jackson, said, I think Morehouse is only for men, but I'm going to check. And she checked. Obviously, Morehouse is a historically Black college for men. But I don't remember exactly when I learned about Spelman, but it was very clear to me early on that I wanted to go to Spelman and that I wanted to teach, and that was going to be my path. And so I stayed on that path for quite some time, but it wasn't until I got older, probably late high school, definitely when I was at Spelman, where I started to really understand this political nature of education. I remember the first time someone said to me, Jamilah, teaching the education system can be really political. I really I did not have a full understanding of what that meant, because in my mind it was just like everyone in education is not just here for the children. And so it was this combination of understanding the civic and social responsibility of educators, but also as I got older, being able to pay attention to what was happening in my surroundings. I talk about in the book how education seemed to free me in the same ways that it seemed to trap and not free, literally imprison other people who were around me, kids that I grew up with, kids that I went to school with. Really seeing just the divergence of our paths and understanding that education did play a role in that. I lost a number of classmates and kids that I grew up really, really early on in terms of, to violence, to
Mhm.
a number of them are still incarcerated, and that was not lost on me. It still is not lost on me. I remember the first time that I read about survivor's guilt and just really having a difficult time in this cognitive dissonance around how I have been able to move um, in a path that has seemed to really allow for opportunity and achievement and success. And certainly, I've worked really, really hard, but also understanding. I always say to people, it's one thing to be able to read and write about systemic oppression, to read and write about racism and mass incarceration. It's another thing to read and write about it, but to also live it and to see
Mm.
uh, the the devastation of its impacts. And so
Right.
my journey into education and what has sustained me in education has always been tied to what I lived, what I saw, what I experienced, and truly believing that education is a pathway to liberation.
And as I'm listening to you, it's very apparent that you had a strong support system throughout your K to 12. You had adults in your life, teachers, and of course, family members who helped shape you to become the human being that you are today. And then going to Spelman, where you're just around Black women, young Black women from all different walks of life that had to shape your development as well. But what I'm wondering is just going back to your K-12 experience, did you ever experience any times where you were struggling to embrace parts of your identity? I'm assuming you probably didn't, given what you've shared, but I'm wondering if there were times where maybe you had a hint of doubt or there was some questioning around that.
That's a great question. So initially, when I thought about the question, it was like, no, not really. K to 12, and then going to an HBCU, I was mostly in schooling experiences with people who look like me and who had similar experiences. But then there are two things that do stick out. I remember, again, because my first formal, like traditional school experience was a performing arts school. I developed a love of dance really early. I developed a love of, I remember seeing Alvin Ailey and Debbie Allen, and developing a love of modern dance and of ballet. And I remember being around other Black students, and sometimes that being like a point of like something that I was teased about, having a love for wanting to dance, and particularly that style of dance, being in
Mhm.
theater, being a part of musicals and things like that. And so it did take me some time to really find like my community or my group, even within our respective community. Certainly, I couldn't name it then, but when I think about the different ways that internalized racism shows up within our communities and shows up even among children, even though we are not using that language, this idea that if I am Black, I can only desire certain types of things, I can only pursue certain types of things. So that was, I guess, an aspect of my identity that was different earlier on. But also, when I think about getting to Spelman College, it was the first time in my life I was around other Black people that came from money, people that came from, certainly in comparison to my background and where and how I grew up, it was the first time that I was around people that came from like affluent neighborhoods, affluent schools. And, Spelman just does a really phenomenal job at curating sisterhood and curating this really beautiful opportunity where Black women belong and are nourished. But I do remember when I think back on my experience and first arriving there, just feeling a little different because that just was not my experience. And so those are some of the things that come to mind. But it was really beautiful to have this experience, K to 12, and then certainly my undergraduate experience, just being immersed in Blackness for sure.
And going to HBCU will definitely help shape you to become the advocate that you are today. And I want to go ahead and fast forward a little bit because you go to Spelman, you have this great experience, and then at some point, you find yourself as a first year teacher in Boston, of all places. And as someone that has lived in Boston for many years, I know what the climate is like out there, both within the public schools and even the charter schools around there. So I'd love for you to just share what that first year was like for you, as far as the ups and downs, growing pains, and everything between.
Yeah, Boston was really interesting going from my undergraduate experience to graduate school in Boston. I went to Boston College. Um, but I was very fortunate to be a part of a program at Boston College that focused specifically on social justice and preparing teachers and educators through this social justice
Was it
lens.
Donovan's? Was it Donovan?
It was a Donovan program, yes.
Ah, shout out to
So,
Donovan Urban Scholars
yes.
Program. Yes.
Yeah. So we had our own bubble within, this predominantly white, um, experience that
Yeah.
was Boston College, in addition to just being in a place like Boston. So the one thing that I say to people about the HBCU experience, and particularly a place like Spelman, is that Spelman prepares us to go
Mm.
anywhere in the world. I often say to people, I don't have imposter syndrome, never had imposter syndrome. And my Spelman experience was a large part of that. I don't sit at a table, I don't walk into rooms feeling like I don't belong. In fact, I know that I belong in those spaces. I usually am overqualified to be in those spaces. I don't look at other beautiful, Black, intelligent women. I don't see them as, um,
Competition.
I don't see them as competition. I
Right.
see them as sisters. I see them as extensions of myself. And so going from a place like Spelman to Boston, I didn't feel nervous. I felt fully prepared for what I was walking into. But certainly Frederick Douglass talks about this in the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, where he says that the more that he learned to read, the more critical and conscious he became, the more he started to hate the people around him, the
Mhm.
systems around him, enslavement around him, because it starts to, when you when you learn in a place that is developing your critical consciousness, you start to see the world differently. And so, what did happen to me shifting from a place like Atlanta, and particularly being at Spelman, to Boston, it was just really harmful. My heart was really grieved. Just seeing quite literally the disparity. Being in It was a really beautiful opportunity to be in spaces with my cohort, other Donovan scholars who were all, studying education through this social justice lens. But we did have to take courses outside of that. And so navigating those experiences with other professors, with other faculty who just didn't get it, who are a part of, white folks who uphold these really harmful systems within institutions of higher ed, the exhaustion that comes from having to advocate for myself, have the conversations. And certainly I'm not going to back away from the conversation as a Spelman woman, but even if you have the tools and you have the resources and you have the confidence, it still is really exhausting to have to battle in that way. And then moving into my first year of teaching, I was really young. I think I went into my master's program right after graduating from Spelman. So I want to say I was 23, 24 my first year of teaching. And
Gotcha.
so there are a number of things that make teaching really difficult, in addition to it being my first year of teaching. But the emotional toll, the emotional weight that comes with being a Black woman, serving in a community, working with students whose backgrounds are very similar to my own. There was a lot that I still had not learned in terms of how to just protect my energy, how to protect my
Mhm.
peace, how to care for myself as an educator. And so I was just holding a lot emotionally, spiritually, intellectually, in terms of really wanting to make sure that I was bringing my best and doing my best for the young people that I serve, because I truly, truly understood and understand the cost of what happens when we are not educated well, when we are not educated critically, when we are not educated lovingly, and when we are not educated in ways that center our liberation. And so holding all of that was really difficult. There were times in working in the particular charter school that I was working in that I felt like I was teaching in a prison. I started to
Mhm.
lose my love of teaching, which opened the door for me to pursue teaching in international spaces, because I didn't want to leave teaching altogether. Um, but there was a lot of just like the systems of education, particularly in charter schools, that made it really difficult for me to be well, that made it really difficult to just stay in love with the work. And it was just my first year. But there were ways that as I continued in the field, as I continued in the work, I had to learn how to arm myself, how to protect myself, so that I could continue to show up for young people.
Hi friends, it's me, Thaddeus from Thaddeus Nature Notebook. Are you loving our journey into the wild and learning all about awesome animals? Then don't forget to subscribe. You can find Thaddeus Nature Notebook on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Just hit that subscribe button and never miss a new episode. And if you're on YouTube, give us a thumbs up and leave a comment about your favorite animal. Thanks for listening and exploring nature with me. Let's keep discovering together. Now back to my daddy's self.
And as I'm listening to you, I'm also listening to my wife, because my wife is a Wellesley College graduate,
Mm,
right? And similar, I mean, Wellesley, predominantly white, but also all women's college, prestigious all women's college. Just like with Spelman, you have a lot of graduates who come out of the college and they go on to do extraordinary things. And one thing that I've learned about the brand, whether we're talking Spelman, Wellesley, other prestigious women's colleges, is that you come out of there with a positive self-image about yourself, but also you hold high expectations for yourself and in any space that you go in. So the zeal is at an optimal level compared to your colleagues and counterparts. So you want to come in there and you want to disrupt this system. You want to change this. You just see all the issues that you are diagnosing, And then you kind of get frustrated when you don't see other people coming in with that same zeal or with the same kind of commitment. And then that leads you to want to engage even more and try to maybe fix everything that's around, which is where the zeal comes in. So I'm wondering, as you were going through that first year experience, did part of that Spelman zeal come out like, I gotta show them like where I'm coming from, and this is who I am. This is how committed I am to this work that we call education. And by any means, we're gonna try to do what we need to do to improve the quality of what's happening around us.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think the ways of Spelman are so ingrained that I may walk into spaces and may have walked into spaces and maybe not have thought intentionally that I'm going to go in here, I'm going to disrupt, I'm going
Like
to
inherent though.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
just there. I'm going to go here, go into a space. I'm going to be who I know that I've been called to be. I am really clear on my purpose of education. I am clear on the purpose of education, particularly in educating students of the global majority. I have a really clear understanding of how, liberation, social justice, healing has to be central. It is integral to what, what our young people deserve in terms of education. And so it was the heart of it, was the center of what I was doing, but doing so within a system that is designed to marginalize, a system that is designed to oppress, to silence, to erase, to harm, to sustain violence. It appears as though you're coming in, bulldozing, there to disrupt, there to create a number of issues. Fortunately for me, I was working under the leadership of a Black woman who I think is a really incredible leader. She actually appointed me to a leadership position in my first year of teaching and was very supportive of my thought leadership, was very supportive of my pushes, my questioning. And I single her out because most of my principals were that way. Not all of them were that way, but that's another story in terms of what pushed me to leave education, or education in a traditional or formal setting. But I was supported. A conversation was like merely a conversation, and there wasn't a lot of resistance that came from her, and I'm very fortunate for that. But there still were a lot of the impacts and the implications and the consequences that come from working within a system. Even if you have really amazing people that are there to do really great work, if you're working under really amazing leadership that is, they're leading in really powerful and liberatory ways, even still working within a system can be really exhausting, especially if you are seen as someone that is a disruptor, someone who is a truth teller, someone that is there rocking the boat, pioneering, innovating, and in ways that are designed to work against, to mitigate, to eliminate oppression. Certainly there is a cost that comes with that, for sure.
Yeah, and I think that's where, for a lot of us, that invisible tax comes in, that racial battle fatigue comes in, because we always feel like we come into these spaces having to do more than what's required within our scope. And that just comes with the work that we do. And I do want to get into that, but I want to make sure that we talk about your international experience. So you mentioned that you spent the 1 year in Boston. You eventually find yourself in Dominican Republic to start your international journey. So I want to talk about that, because good thing about being in this podcast space is I got so many friends there. So I know you was on Dr. Asia Lyons podcast, and I was able to listen to that incredible conversation. Shout out to her.
Yeah.
And then my man Bobby Morgan with the Liberation Lab podcast. So I've been able to listen to some of the stories, but I want to give you a chance to just talk about DR as far as the transition into that space? Because I know that there was a learning curve when
Mm-hmm.
you were, trying to figure out, like, how do I orient myself in
Mm-hmm.
this space where the demographic is very different from what I'm used to being around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was a learning curve indeed. As exciting and as beautiful that as that experience was, and I taught in the Dominican Republic for 2 years. I taught at an international baccalaureate school for folks who are listening and may not be aware, these are the types of schools across the globe that like diplomats and ambassadors and really wealthy families send their children to. And so shifting from teaching in a charter school in Boston with predominantly or all students of the global majority to this wealthy, affluent school community in the Dominican Republic was really challenging at first for me. One, because again, I grew up, the only private school experience I had was Spelman. And then Boston College, but in terms of my K to 12 experience, it was all public school, and it was all students who looked like me, who came from very similar backgrounds. And I entered the teaching profession knowing that I wanted to just teach mostly in urban schools with students who came from a similar background to me. I wanted to work with students of the global majority. But again, I had had this experience during my first year of teaching where I knew that I did not want to continue at that particular school, but I was not ready to leave teaching. And I had heard about this really beautiful opportunity to teach abroad. One of the
Mhm.
beautiful things about Spelman as well is that Spelman believes in developing global citizens. And so a number of my international experiences started or came when I was a student at Spelman. I was able to teach in Beijing, China. I was able to travel to the Middle East, to Jordan. I was able to do social justice work in Cape Town, South Africa. And so I still have this deep love. I was early in my 20s. Um, and wanted to embark upon teaching internationally. I believe that the work of liberation through education is not something that just needs to happen in the US. I believe that it's something that needs to happen globally. Um, and so when I got to DR, there were a number of things that I was thinking. One, I was nervous and excited being in a country where I was not fluent in the language, but I saw it as a really powerful learning opportunity. I wasn't super far from home, but I was able to be immersed in a culture that was different, very similar, but also very different from my own. And I was very excited about being able to learn and to be immersed in that way. But I also stood in this role. Teachers, we have great privilege, and especially in a country like the Dominican Republic and a number of countries
Yeah.
outside of the US where teachers are revered. Teachers are highly respected. I remember the very first day I came into the classroom and all of my students stood. And I was not like they all stand as like a sign of respect until you tell them to
Hmm.
sit down. And I was not used to something like that. And so while I was really excited to learn alongside my students and to learn from my students, there was also just this questioning that I had in the back of my mind of exactly am I going to teach? Like, yes, of course, I'm here. I know that I'm here to teach English language and literature. Like, that's my bachelor's is in English. I was a high school English teacher in the States. Yes, I was there to teach that subject. But in terms of the deeper, like the heart centered work that I seek to do in the classroom, I wasn't sure how I was going to do that with wealthy, affluent Dominican, mostly white Dominican students. I just wasn't sure. The
Right.
more that I learned about the country, the more that I learned about and developed relationships with my students, it became really clear to me that I can still do the work of social justice and the work of liberation through teaching, which is what I believe in. But the way that I have those conversations, the types of questions that I ask, the way that I support it, or the way that I structure my lessons, my unit plans are very different when I'm working with students who ultimately are going to have access and opportunity into leadership, into really powerful positions. Many of them have already, because this was maybe like 12, 13 years ago. But knowing that many of my students were going to study internationally, going to study in the States, were going to have access and opportunities that many of my students in the States didn't necessarily have readily available at their fingertips just by pure privilege. It was important for me to make sure that my students understood oppression, that they understood privilege, that they understood the roles that they can play in being able to mitigate, to eliminate, to erase. But in order to be in a position where you have to do that, we have to make sure that our hearts are open, that we're developing empathy, which is something that can be really challenging. But I found that my students were really open to, they have really, really beautiful hearts. And then it was diving into our work in a way that allowed them to develop a critical lens without me forcing them to, but creating a classroom environment where it was something that they willingly chose to do. And they did so in such powerful ways. And that actually was the start of my writing and publication because of the really powerful work that I was able to do in the Dominican Republic. The other thing about the Dominican Republic, and a lot of this I learned again alongside my students, it's a really beautiful place. But like a number of places within the diaspora, any country that was touched by enslavement, you see these similarities. There are differences, but you also see these similarities around what racism looks like, what colorism looks like. Any country where enslavement was a part of the structure, or colonization was a part of the structure, you see a lot of these similarities in terms of how people are uniquely harmed. And so it was really powerful to guide my students in being able to pick out what that looks like. You know, different countries and environments have different types of human rights violations, different types of crimes against humanity. And so it was really important for my students to be able to point out themselves like what this looks like within their community, and then to also really dive into what do we do about it. And so that was really powerful. It was also really powerful to be able to do similar work in India with educators, but it really cemented for me, no, you know, this is not work that I just have to do in the US. This is global work. This is work that needs to happen for all of humanity.
And then you mentioned India, and I know with India, there were things that you witnessed that I believe helped to shape the path that you're currently on right now. So I know when you're in India, you saw, obviously there's the caste system that's still present there, but you saw specifically the injustices against women and young girls
Mhm.
in that country. And this is going to be a perfect segue into your current venture with She Imprints, which I would love you to talk about. I'm wondering if seeing that and witnessing it, did that serve in a way, maybe you didn't realize at the time, but do you think that was a harbinger for She Imprints, seeing some of those images while you were in India? Of course, coupled with your own experience being a Black woman in America, and what you've experienced as far as microaggressions and other things.
Absolutely. That's a beautiful question and connection. Absolutely. When I completed a fellowship that took me to India, and I designed a part of my program, or my reason for being there was to study the impact of human rights education, of social justice education in India. And I was able to travel throughout the country, and heard really powerful, really heartbreaking stories, was able to witness a number of, hear about experience secondhand, like a number of atrocities and types of violence against people, and especially women and girls. When I was at Spelman, the work I developed, so I had the opportunity to run from a Spelman College, and a part of that is we develop a platform, which is work that we want to do through Spelman and like within the community. And so at the time, the platform that I developed was Imprints, called Imprints at the time. And it was very similar work. And the more that I have grown, the more that I have been exposed to, and certainly being in India was a part of that experience, it really has added on layers and has refined and expanded the work that I do now and what it looks like. But certainly being in community, talking to women and girls, mostly women and girls. There were some spaces where I was also able to interact with men and boys as well in India, but a lot of the work was with women and girls. A lot of the crimes, the violence, the human rights violations were levied against women and girls. And that was really devastating and really heart-wrenching. And certainly thinking about my own experience as a Black woman in America, it deepened and it affirmed the work that I do. And thinking specifically about the work through She Imprints. And so the organization as it exists now, it's a couple years, or I think we're 3 years old now. Yeah, we're in 2025. I started the organization She Imprints officially in 2022, and we serve at the intersection of wellness and justice for women and girls of the global majority. And certainly the emphasis on who I serve in terms of the audience, it absolutely ties to my experience as a sojourner, as someone who has been able to have the privilege to really travel to over 20 countries at this point in my life. And again, see the connection when it comes to crimes and the violence against women and girls in various parts of the world, but also the beauty and the power and the intelligence and the grace and how much, women and girls really do hold up the world, really do hold up our communities. And so, the organization is designed to make sure that we are poured into, that our wellness is central to just the work that we do, to all that we hold in our lives, and our work and our families. And when I think about wellness, certainly like our physical well-being is a part of that, but I've developed a model that supports us in thinking about our wellness holistically. What does it look like for us to be mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, financially, professionally, in our relationships? What does it look like for us to be well? And I see that as a social justice issue. I see it as a form of resistance. I often go back to a mantra that I carry with me by Audre Lorde, where she says that caring for myself is not self-indulgence. Caring for myself is self-preservation. And that is an act of political warfare. And when I think about what it means, the value of pouring into the wellness and the leadership of women and girls of a global majority specifically, that is a deliberate act of resistance. That is deliberate justice work.
Hey, educators, change makers, and champions for equity. If you care about diversifying our educator workforce and building schools where every student belongs, you need to know about the Pennsylvania Educator Diversity Consortium, better known as PEDC. PEDC is a statewide coalition of educators, advocates, and institutions working to increase educator diversity and embed culturally relevant and sustaining education across Pennsylvania and beyond. From June 24th to 26th, they're hosting their annual virtual summit, 3 days of community, truth-telling, and action. This year's keynote speakers include Dr. Pedro Noguera, and you'll have access to 40 powerful sessions led by educators, students, and leaders from across the country. It's free, it's open to everyone, teachers, school leaders, researchers, advocates, and students alike. Register now at paeddiversity.org/summit 2025 and be part of a movement that's transforming education through solidarity. Please reach out if you have any questions or need more information. I'm glad you mentioned that because I know for you, you reach a tipping point where you just said enough was enough. You're climbing up the ladder in education leadership. You eventually become an assistant principal. And you recognize that, you know what? I don't need to continue to deal with the microaggressions. I don't need to continue to deal with the anti-Black behavior from people who are around me. And I need to prioritize myself. So when you said that Audre Lorde quote, I knew where that was coming from. But what I want to know from you, given your journey and where you are right now, at what point did you recognize the value of creating boundaries for yourself? When did you recognize that it was important to rest? and to have that time of solitude.
I think this was a lesson that I learned the hard way.
Yeah.
It came to a head during my work as an assistant principal. In 2018, I became a yoga teacher. I was drawn to yoga, a large part of it just due to my background as a dancer and wanting to find just forms of exercise that felt really good in and on my body. Um, I really leaned into the mind body spirit connection. And so I remember when I finished my yoga teacher training. So while I was going through the training in New York, I was still teaching full time. I had started a second master's program at Teachers College, Columbia. And so I was holding a lot, doing a lot. There were a lot of amazing things that I learned in my career and certainly as a student, professionally, intellectually. But one of those things was not the importance of caring for myself, the importance of boundaries, the importance of work-life balance. That was just something people are having that conversation now, but they were not having that conversation then. And
Nope.
so it really was my journey with yoga, with becoming a yoga teacher that really helped me look at my spiritual life, my physical life, my mental life differently. I also have been in therapy since I was in graduate school. And so I had this awareness like in the back of my mind, like, yes, caring for my mental health is really important. I know that as a teacher, I'm holding a lot. And so I'm going to, go to therapy. I'm going to stay in therapy. But towards the end of my yoga teacher training in 2018, it became clear to me like, okay, I don't want to continue to stay in the classroom. I know that I have a lot to bring to the education space. I should try to move into leadership. And I had a student say to me, I was teaching seniors at the time, and he said, Miss Pitts, like, you do a really good job. Like, have you ever considered training other teachers? And so I took that as a sign, like, okay, maybe it is time for me. Maybe it is okay for me to graduate, into this space of administration and of leadership. And so when I arrived into coaching, leadership, being a dean, later becoming an assistant principal, I had also carried with me the importance of self-care, the importance of if I'm going to continue to show up and do work that constantly pulls from me and takes from me, and I am a naturally generous person. Many of us are, I think, to really remain in education and to do well. Many of us
Yes.
are givers. I have to make sure that I am pouring back into myself, and it can be really difficult to do that in the education space. But by the time I was an assistant principal, when we were developing the mission of our school, a large part of our focus was on liberation. And I thought it was really important that we include healing as a part of that because I believe that it is central to the work of liberation. We cannot liberate anybody without liberating ourselves first and understanding that that is continuous work. For educators, especially, and I find it baffling that a part of our requirement, of being an educator, of our own professional development, is our personal development. There are so many of us that are holding a lot of hurt, that have navigated and held a lot of trauma, including myself. And if we are not careful to make sure that we are doing our own work, we often pass that on to the young people that we are serving, and it is not fair. And so that awareness and that recognition I had as a school leader, I really tried to implement and do that work and carve out that work in space for the educators that I was leading, and also stand up for myself. But I found a lot of pushback. I experienced a lot of backlash, a lot of um, isolation because my stance on that was seen as, oh, well, you're not being a team player. You're being really difficult. You're being self. I had a Black woman leader say to me, your wellness has to look different because you're in leadership. And so, understanding people can't give what they don't have. People can't lead or implement something that they have not lived or do not practice themselves. So I understood that, but it also made it really challenging and incredibly exhausting for me. One, to be in a leadership position, to do the work that I believe in, which is centering liberation in a system and in a space where there is misogyny. There are the ways that patriarchy shows up. There's the ways that sexism shows up. And I
Right.
felt these things more so as a leader than I did as a classroom teacher. There are the ways that racism shows up, all of the different intersections of that I'm experiencing as a Black woman. And I'm still trying to fight. But I'm also, working alongside other Black women who perhaps do not see the beauty of their own selves and therefore see me as a threat. I'm working against that. I'm working against really maintaining these boundaries to care for myself and to make sure that I'm well so that I can show up and continue to do well. Instead of that being embraced as a really healthy way to live, it was seen as something that was contrary to effective leadership. And so I ultimately got to a point where that was all of it. The combination of all of it was far too much. And I could feel the toll on my body. I could feel the toll on my mental health. And
Mhm.
ultimately led me to this place of resigning and charting the path that I am now.
And speaking of charting the path that you're on now, you once said that you're on a tenuous journey of curating your life. So, given that, I want to know, what are some things that you're trying to explore about yourself today that maybe you didn't explore early on in your career? And do you really feel at peace right now?
Hmm. Peace feels like something that I am working to. Peace feels like something that I'm wanting to get to this place of it always being there no matter what. Like
Still
I
pursue?
Yes. And so I when I think about peace, I think about something that is, it's not necessarily the absence of things, but it is, I do believe, and my meditation practice, my yoga practice, the work that I do as a wellness leader reassures me of this. There is this steady place of peace within, but I am still learning how to constantly be able to access it no matter what is happening. I am constantly in pursuit of understanding that this is a place that I can always tap back into, like, regardless of what is happening around me. And I'll be honest in saying that is still a practice. It's something that I'm still pursuing. It will probably be a part of just like my lifelong practice, but I believe that I will get better at it. I think this place that I am in now is this very fortunate and privileged place as an entrepreneur, as an author, of being able to, there are certainly challenges that comes with being an entrepreneur, with being an author. You hold and you carry a lot, but it has been one of the few ways that I've been able to really protect myself, and protect my own pursuit of liberation and of peace. But a part of what I'm focusing on right now is building and growing and scaling in a way that does not compromise my peace, that does not compromise my well being. Like, that to me is success. Certainly, as an author and as an entrepreneur, there are, many markers that, or indicators of success, that are tied to time, that are tied to output, that are tied to financial gain. And, like, that is what it is. But what feels successful to me is to be a healthy person, to be a well person, to be at peace, to be a person who can easily and readily access joy. Someone who is able to just like remember love and operate in love always. And that is a practice. I am In April, I took two vacations, one of them for my birthday at the end of the month, and another was a writer's retreat that I was able to gifted to attend. This really beautiful experience. And I had to remind myself in both of those times, how beautiful and powerful would it be to curate a life that I don't need a vacation from. Um, but just being able, like, the small things I'm finding bring me peace. Gratitude is something that's a large part of my pleasure practice and my peace practice. And so, yeah, peace brings up a lot for me because it's like, yep, still got to work at it and towards
Right.
it. But the journey is a beautiful one. It's a worthy one.
I think we're all trying to pursue it in some shape or form, but it's something that you have to discipline yourself to do.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to
Mm-hmm.
quiet your mind and quiet your body to get to that place where you could just focus and just stabilize yourself.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, it's a lot. It's a
Yeah.
lot.
And I have written somewhere in a journal that surrender for me equals peace.
Mm.
And I think the more that I am in practice of just kind of taking my hands off of things and trusting, surrendering to the will of that which is greater than me, but also resides in me, the more at peace I will be. And that is a huge learning for me as someone that likes to be in control.
Hmm. I think especially in these current times that we're in, we have to just be able to control what we can't control. There are things that happen around us that unfortunately we have no control over.
Mhm.
So we got to do the best that we can within, our circumstance. And that's easier said than done. I could tell you that.
Mhm.
But as we approach the hour, I want to close the conversation with this question that I ask everybody. And I know that you've since transitioned out of the traditional K-12 space, but listen, at the end of the day, we are still educators at heart in everything that we do. So I want to know, how do you continue to stay true to the teacher in you?
Mhm. Yeah, that's the answer came quickly for me. I remain a student. I
Mm,
remain a student. I believe that the most effective and the most powerful teachers are not people who are seeking necessarily to instruct. I think what makes someone a really powerful teacher is remaining someone who is committed to learning. So much of my life, so many of my really amazing experiences, from travel to different forms of relationships to various opportunities, I think have come by way of me being a learner, of me being a student. And I think it's interesting to be in this space now where people seek me out as an educator, as an expert, as a leading voice, and I receive it, and I receive it with gratitude and with grace. I don't take it lightly, but I think a lot of what I'm able to offer and a lot of what I'm able to give has come from me pursuing life as a student.
excellent, excellent. And I think we're all in that perpetual role as learners.
Hmm.
No matter how much we advance in life, we still have to learn in order to build capacity and
Hmm.
continue to grow. That's just an ongoing process.
Hmm.
Jamilah, thank you so much. This has been a great conversation. I wish we can go another hour, but you know, life continues to go on. But we'll definitely try to find a way to have you come back on if you love to come back on, of course.
Absolutely.
But before I let you go, I want to give you an opportunity to share with people how they can connect with you on social media. And also, please feel free to plug your other ventures. You can even plug your book. We didn't get to talk about Towards Liberation, so you could talk about that and anything else that is on the horizon.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for this. The conversation is always really powerful. I always say to people, we cannot heal what we do not speak. And so thank you so much for the conversation and the opportunity. It's always incredibly healing. Yeah, so the book can be purchased anywhere books are sold. Toward Liberation, Educational Practices Rooted in Activism, Healing, and Love, though I do pinpoint the importance of supporting our indie bookstores, Black woman-owned stores, and I do link to a few of those in my website at jamilahpitts.com, and also my wellness organization, She Imprints IDTALK4ED.org. There's some really powerful programs that exist for women of the global majority, particularly women who are serving as leaders. We tend to give a lot, but don't always pour back into ourselves. So there's a really powerful Emerge program for women of color leaders, as well as our She Leads program, which focuses on developing programming and communities that focus on centering girls of the global majority. And so both of those are open right now for our upcoming cohort this spring.
All right. Y'all heard it from Jamilah. So make sure you connect with her to learn more. And we're going to wrap it up here. So I want to thank everybody for coming on to another episode of IDTALK for Educators Live. And as always, I wish you all good morning, good afternoon, good night, wherever you are in the world. And we're going to do this again another time. Peace out, everybody.